The golden afternoon sun stretched across the pristine sidewalks of Capitol Street, the main thoroughfare leading into Sacramento's bustling government complex. The air was crisp, the midweek California weather pleasant. Isabelle Maro, dressed in an elegant, perfectly tailored business suit, strolled leisurely. Her Manolo Blahnik heels clicked steadily on the cobblestones, and the classic black Hermès Kelly handbag slung over her arm accentuated the confident elegance of a successful businesswoman. She had just finished a stressful but productive meeting at the office of a large law firm nearby. Instead of calling for a cab, she decided to walk a few blocks to Le Jardin, her favorite French restaurant, to treat herself to a late lunch and enjoy some rare fresh air in her busy schedule. She cherished these moments of being herself, away from her public role and constant attention. Isabelle was lost in thought about her lunch menu when she heard the sound of a car slowing down beside her. She was a little surprised to see a Sacramento Police Department patrol car slowly pulling up to the curb, almost parallel to her. She glanced over, trying to keep her composure, thinking they were probably just doing a patrol. But then the driver's window rolled down. Officer Frank Kowalski, a white man in his 40s with a red face and a somewhat scrutinizing gaze, leaned out to look at her. In the passenger seat sat Officer Tim O'Connell, younger, also white, with a mischievous but unfriendly grin. "Hello, beautiful lady," Kowalski said, his voice trying to be friendly but with a hint of sarcasm. "Where are you going in such a hurry in the middle of the day? Did you get lost?" Isabelle frowned slightly at the abrupt and somewhat rude question, but she maintained a minimal level of politeness. "No, thank you, officer," she replied curtly, her voice even. "I'm not lost. I'm on my way to lunch." She hoped that would put an end to the unnecessary conversation. But O'Connell chimed in, leaning out the passenger window, chuckling. "Lunch in this fancy neighborhood? Must be an important date with some big shot." He eyed Isabelle's expensive outfit appraisingly. Kowalski didn't miss the opportunity. He looked her up and down, his eyes lingering on her designer handbag. "Nice outfit," he said, his tone shifting from pretend friendliness to curiosity and mockery. "It looks expensive. What kind of fancy job do you have, young lady?" He used the phrase young lady with a condescending tone, as if he were talking to a prostitute rather than a well-mannered woman. "Or is there some rich guy sponsoring it?" By now, Isabelle couldn't help but sense the men's malicious intent and lack of respect. Discomfort was building inside her. She wasn't used to being treated like this, and she certainly wasn't going to take it in silence. "I don't think my work or personal life is any of your business," she said, her voice noticeably colder. "Please excuse me." She turned around, intending to walk away quickly, hoping to escape this unpleasant encounter. But she was wrong. These two policemen clearly had no intention of letting her go so easily. They were bored, and they had found a new amusement. The woman officers Kowalski and O'Connell had just stopped and taunted was not just any successful Geschäftsfrau or fancy lady. She was Isabelle Maro, the First Lady of California, the wife and close advisor to Governor Gavin Maro, the most powerful man in the state. Isabelle, however, had never wanted to live in her husband's shadow, even before Gavin Maro was elected governor. She was a respected name in the business world. She holds an MBA from Stanford and had held senior positions at major corporations before founding her own strategy consulting firm, advising multinational corporations and non-profit organizations. In addition, she runs a prestigious charity focused on girls' education and women's empowerment. She is the epitome of a modern woman, smart, sharp, financially independent, and with an impressive career. Being First Lady has given her more opportunities to work on larger-scale social projects, but it has also made her private life more scrutinized. Isabelle has always tried to balance her public role and her personal life. She does not like to show off and does not want to rely on her husband's position to demand privileges. She still drives herself when not on official schedules, goes shopping by herself and meets friends and business partners alone. Her elegant and luxurious style of dress has always been part of who she is and what she does, not to flaunt her status. That afternoon, after a productive meeting, she simply wanted to take a walk alone, enjoying some warm sunshine and fresh air before a late lunch. She did not have a bodyguard accompanying her on personal occasions like this, partly because she wanted to maintain her privacy, and partly because she trusted the safety of the central capital area. She could not have imagined that the danger would come from the very people responsible for security. On the other hand, Officer Frank Kowalski is a completely different story. After nearly 20 years in the police force, his career has stagnated as a patrolman. He watches his younger colleagues get promoted and given more important assignments while he drives around the city every day, handling petty cases and dealing with all sorts of people he despises. The accumulated resentment turns into bitterness, especially toward those he deems undeserving of a good life: immigrants, people of color, successful women. He envies their wealth and success, and he enjoys using his small amount of power to make things difficult for them, to teach them a lesson, to feel like he still has value. He had been warned by his superiors several times about his inappropriate behavior, but thanks to his seniority and cleverness in covering it up, he had never faced any truly severe form of discipline. Officer Tim O'Connell is younger, having only been on the force for a few years. He may not be as prejudiced as Kowalski initially was, but he is impressionable and easily influenced. He admires Kowalski's experience, which is actually callousness and disregard for rules, and often goes along with his older colleagues' words and actions to gain acceptance and appear tough himself. Moreover, the afternoon shift is often quite boring, especially when patrolling the quiet downtown area. Finding someone to tease to kill time sometimes becomes a harmful pastime. And Isabelle Maro, with her smooth brown skin, elegant suit, confident demeanor, and designer handbag, unwittingly became the perfect target for the boredom, prejudice, and petty abuse of power of these two idle policemen. Little did they know that the fancy lady they were trying to tease was the most powerful woman in the state. Isabelle Maro's polite but firm attempt to end the conversation was ineffective and only added fuel to the fire. Her daring to show attitude and walk away made Officer Kowalski feel slighted. He was not used to being rejected, especially by a black woman he considered inferior to him. "Hold on, ma'am." Kowalski stepped out of the car quickly, O'Connell following right behind. Both of them deliberately stood in front of Isabelle, blocking her way. "We're not done asking. Just wanted to ask a few more questions." "It's a security check," he said, deliberately making up a fake excuse. "Do you mind showing us your identification?" Asking for her identification in broad daylight while she was walking down the street was clearly harassment. Isabelle realized the situation was getting more serious. This was no longer a vulgar joke, but a deliberate abuse of power. "I have done nothing wrong," Isabelle replied, her voice colder and more determined. "You have no legal reason to stop me or demand to see my papers. I demand that you move out of my way." She tried to keep her voice calm, but anger was already rising inside her. Isabelle's uncompromising and somewhat defiant attitude further angered Kowalski and O'Connell. They thought she was just trying to show off her importance, a form of flaunting that comes with being nouveau riche or someone who has achieved status through illegitimate means. Racial and gender biases began to show more blatantly in their words. "Oh, how uppity. Now you're lecturing the police," Kowalski sneered, his voice full of contempt. "What the hell does a woman like you know about rules and regulations? You're probably just good at lying on your back and making money, right?" His words became obscene and deeply insulting. O'Connell stood beside him, laughing, his expression crudely amused. "Is this a new arrival in the area? Can you tell? Me the price? How much is the express train an hour?" O'Connell winked at Kowalski, and they both laughed as if it were a very funny joke. "Look at the way you're dressed," Kowalski continued, pointing at Isabelle's suit and handbag. "Like a queen. What the hell is this? If you're not hanging out with some fat old man with a lot of money, you're probably selling drugs or contraband. What decent person would have the money to wear designer clothes from head to toe like this? He let out a long whistle, a rude sound that echoed through the elegant street. Isabelle felt her blood boil. Anger and humiliation burned her face. She had never before been treated so poorly or spoken to so lowly. She tightened her grip on her bag, taking deep breaths to calm herself. She knew that getting angry or arguing would only make matters worse. It was important to remember who these two were. She tried to make out the numbers on their shoulder straps or the name tags on their chests, but they were too close and moving around for her to see. "You," she said, her voice trying to maintain its steely tone despite the anger inside. "Your current behavior constitutes civil harassment and abuse of power. I demand that you stop immediately, and I demand to know both of your names and badge numbers." She did not expect that her legitimate request would further anger the two people who were intoxicated with their petty power. The demand for their names and badge numbers, an act of civil rights awareness, and an intention to pursue the case, was a direct challenge to Kowalski and O'Connell. They were convinced that this black woman was trying to show off, using some money or connections to intimidate the police. Their pride was hurt, and their thuggish instincts rose even stronger. "Oh, you want to know my name and number?" Kowalski sneered, moving closer to Isabelle, deliberately invading her personal space, causing her to take a step back, reflexively. "What for, little sister? Are you planning to go home and cry, tell your sugar daddy or rich husband?" He used a dirty, suggestive tone. "Or do you want to get to know us in private in another way? We don't mind either." O'Connell stood beside her, laughing and clapping his hands in approval of Kowalski's words. "Listen to Frank, girl," he interjected. "Don't make things difficult for yourself. Behave yourself and you might get our word." This had gone too far. Isabelle felt a lump rise in her throat at the vulgarity and perversion of the two uniformed policemen. She realized that if she continued to argue or tried to run, the situation might become more dangerous. Kowalski began to move his hand toward her Hermès handbag, a gesture that was both invasive and threatening. "Let's see," he said, his voice slurring. "Is there anything interesting in this expensive bag? Or is it hiding contraband?" That was the last straw. Isabelle knew. She couldn't stand it any longer. She had tried to stay calm, tried to handle the situation politely and properly. But these two had crossed all limits of tolerance and the law. She had never wanted to use her special status. She had always wanted to be treated like a normal citizen. But in this situation, to protect herself from harassment and possible danger, she was forced to do something she never wanted to do. Isabelle straightened, her head held high. Any signs of fear or confusion she had shown earlier were gone, replaced by a cold expression, a wordless authority radiating from her demeanor. She looked straight into Kowalski's laughing eyes, then glanced at O'Connell, who was standing proudly beside him. She took a deep breath, then spoke. Her voice was not loud, but it was clear, coherent, and filled with an absolute authority that made both policemen freeze. "Listen very carefully, officers," she said slowly, emphasizing each word. "I don't know who you think I am behaving so recklessly and breaking the law. But I can assure you that you have just made a very, very serious mistake. A mistake that will cost you dearly." She paused, letting her warning sink into the tense atmosphere. Her eyes were sharp as knives, piercing the two men across from her. "My name is Isabelle Maro." She saw Kowalski and O'Connell frown slightly. The name sounded familiar, but they couldn't immediately make the connection. "And my husband," Isabelle continued, her voice growing sharper, each word like a hammer blow, "is the governor of this state of California, Gavin Maro." She pulled her latest iPhone out of her purse, and the screen lit up. "Now," she said, her voice icy, "you have two choices. Either you voluntarily state your names and badge numbers for me to take down, Or I will call Chief Evans's private line and ask him who the two officers are that are harassing the governor's wife on Capitol Street. Take your pick. Isabelle. Maro's words, especially the word governor, were like a bomb exploding in the middle of a quiet summer afternoon. Silence. A sudden, heavy silence fell over the sidewalk where the three stood. The sound of traffic on the street seemed to fade. The smug, mocking smiles on Officers Kowalski and O'Connell's faces froze like stone. Their eyes widened, staring at Isabelle Maro, trying to process the information they had just heard. Governor Gavin Maro, the most powerful man in California, and the elegant, classy black woman they had just insulted, harassed, and demanded to check her bag was his wife, the First Lady of the state. No way. That was the first thought that crossed their minds. Surely she was lying, making up a story to scare them, to get away. But as they looked at Isabelle again, her calm, commanding demeanor, her sharp, fearless gaze, her immaculate designer clothes, and the high-end phone in her hand, ready to make a call, a terrible truth began to creep into their consciousness. She didn't look like she was lying. Not at all. Kowalski's face changed color rapidly from red with anger to white as a sheet. Cold sweat began to form on his forehead and temples. Even though it wasn't too hot, his mouth fell open, stuttering. You are... O'Connell did worse. He was shaking visibly, his legs almost giving out. He took a reflexive step back, still staring at Isabelle with a look of utter horror, as if he'd seen a ghost in broad daylight. And then, like a conditioned reflex, their attitude changed 180 degrees. The arrogance and hooliganism disappeared without a trace, giving way to extreme fear and pitiful cowardice. Mrs. Maro, Kowalski finally managed to get her name out, his voice trembling, pathetically obsequious. First Lady. Oh my God, we're so sorry, so sorry. This is a complete and utter misunderstanding. We had no idea. We really had no idea it was you. He began to wave his hands around in a flustered attempt to explain. We were just doing a routine patrol. Seeing you alone, we were a little curious. O'Connell stood beside him, his face still pale, nodding his head like a robot. Yes, that's right. It was just a misunderstanding, ma'am. We meant no harm. Absolutely no harm. We were just joking around. It was really just a joke. He tried to force a crooked smile, but it looked worse than crying. Please forgive us, ma'am. Please don't take it to heart. Please, don't report this. Their sudden and ridiculous change of attitude made Isabelle feel both contempt and disgust. Now, knowing her true identity, they turned to begging and servility. Please, ma'am, Kowalski continued to plead, his voice almost tearful. We really didn't mean to offend you. It was just stupid and thoughtless of us. I have a wife and 2 small children at home. If this gets to the chief of police, my career is over. My life will be ruined. Please, ma'am, have mercy on us and give us a chance to make things right. We promise we won't do it again. O'Connell chimed in. Yes, my lady. Please give us a way out. We truly know our mistakes. We will do anything to make amends. There they stood. 2 large policemen, now looking small and pathetic, begging forgiveness from the woman they had just so mercilessly humiliated. But it was too late. The words had been spoken. The deed had been done. And the consequences were inevitable. Isabelle Maro stood still, looking at the 2 policemen who were groveling and begging before her with cold, unwavering eyes. Her initial fear had completely disappeared, replaced by righteous indignation and an iron determination to bring this matter to light, to hold these abusers of power and prejudice accountable. Their belated and fake apologies could not erase the humiliation she had just suffered. Misunderstanding, Isabelle repeated, her voice icy, cutting through Kowalski's pleas. You call harassing a citizen who is walking by, hurling profanities, racial and gender-based insults, deliberate harassment, and abuse of your authority a misunderstanding, and a joke. She shook her head slowly, her gaze fixed on the two bowed figures. "I don't think so, and I'm sure Chief Evans wouldn't think so either." She didn't say another word to them. She calmly unlocked her phone and quickly scrolled through her contacts. She didn't call her husband, Governor Maro, because she wanted to handle the matter herself and didn't want to make a political scene out of it. Instead, she dialed a number saved under Chief Evans Direct. It was her direct line to the Sacramento Police Department's Chief of Police, which she had as First Lady for emergencies or sensitive situations. The phone rang only once, then someone picked up. "Evans," the chief's voice came from the other end. "Hello, Chief Evans. This is Isabelle Maro," Isabelle said, her voice maintaining a calm, professional tone. "Mrs. Maro, it's an honor to answer the phone. Is there anything I can do for you?" The chief's voice immediately became formal and somewhat worried. "I am on Capitol Street near the corner of 12th, Isabelle said shortly. "I have just been stopped and subjected to severe harassment and assault by two of your officers. I request that you dispatch a senior officer here immediately to handle the situation." "What? Harassing the First Lady?" Chief Evans's voice on the other end of the line was filled with shock and anger. "Ma'am, please remain calm and stay where you are. I will have someone there immediately. Please give me the patrol, car number or identification of those two officers." Isabelle glanced at the patrol car parked nearby, reading the license plate number aloud. Vehicle number 315. She didn't have to strain to see the numbers on Kowalski's or O'Connell's shoulder boards. "Understood, ma'am. Please give me a few minutes. I'll handle this." Chief Evans hung up. Kowalski and O'Connell stood there, listening to Isabelle's entire phone conversation. Their faces grew paler, their limbs shaking. They knew their fate had been sealed. In less than 5 minutes, surprisingly fast, a black sedan without the usual police insignia, but with hidden emergency lights, drove up and stopped right next to patrol car 315. The door opened, and a man in plain clothes but with an air of authority, probably the deputy chief of police, quickly stepped out. He saw Isabelle Maro standing there with a stern expression, then looked at the two patrol officers standing there, frozen, their faces drained of color. He understood immediately what was happening. "Mrs. Maro," the senior officer approached, bowing respectfully and apologetically. "I am Deputy Chief Roberts. Chief Evans sent me here immediately. We are extremely sorry for the unfortunate incident that has occurred to you. Rest assured, we will take this matter seriously." He listened to Isabelle's brief account of the incident, his face growing increasingly angry as he heard the words and actions of his two subordinates. Then he turned back to Kowalski and O'Connell, his eyes sharp as knives. "Officer Kowalski, Officer O'Connell," he shouted, his voice hard. "You two surrender your badges and service weapons immediately without another word. Return immediately to headquarters. Report directly to the Internal Affairs Office and await orders there. Is that understood?" Kowalski and O'Connell, no longer in the mood to resist, tremblingly removed the badges from their chests, pulled their guns out of their holsters, and handed them over to Deputy Chief Roberts. Another police car arrived just in time, and two officers got out of it, receiving orders to escort the two disgraced officers back to headquarters in humiliation and despair. Deputy Chief Roberts stayed behind, once again sincerely apologizing to Isabelle Maro and assuring her that a thorough, fair and prompt investigation would be conducted. He offered to send her a motorcade to the governor's mansion or wherever she wanted to go, but Isabelle politely declined. She just wanted to continue with her original lunch date, even though her mood had been completely ruined. She thanked Mr. Roberts for his quick intervention and quietly walked away, leaving behind a costly lesson in the abuse of power and its inevitable consequences. As soon as Deputy Chief Roberts returned to headquarters and reported the details of the incident, Chief Evans called an emergency meeting with the head of the Internal Affairs Division, IA. The reputation of the Sacramento Police Department was on red alert. The harassment and insult of the First Lady by two of their officers was an unthinkable scandal, one that could have serious political and legal consequences if not dealt with quickly, decisively, and appropriately. An internal investigation was ordered with the highest priority. A team of experienced IA investigators was assigned to clear up the matter in the shortest possible time. Pressure from the chief's office and probably the governor's office, though not publicly, was intense. Isabelle Maro's detailed and official testimony was central to the investigation. She recounted the entire incident in clear, coherent terms, from the stop, the taunts, the racial and sexist remarks, to the harassment and unreasonable demands for identification. Her testimony as a credible and uniquely qualified witness was virtually impossible to refute. Frank Kowalski and Tim O'Connell were also questioned separately by IA investigators. Faced with the testimony of the First Lady and the threat of serious consequences, both men were no longer as evasive as they had been at first. They admitted that they had stopped Isabelle Maro and had made inappropriate comments. However, they tried to minimize their actions, claiming that it was a stupid joke, thoughtless, without malice, or that they had misunderstood Isabelle's attitude. But these weak excuses could not cover up the nature of their wrongdoing. Investigators quickly gathered other evidence. GPS data from Patrol Car 315 confirmed that the car had stopped on Capitol Street during the time Isabelle reported, without any calls for assistance or reports of unusual activity at that location. This proved that the stop was voluntary and without justification. Kowalski's work record was thoroughly reviewed. Reports of previous reprimands for rudeness and complaints from citizens of discrimination, which had not been sufficient to warrant serious disciplinary action, were now re-examined in light of this serious incident, forming further evidence of his predilection for abuse of power and prejudice. O'Connell, despite having a cleaner record, was also found guilty of complicity and failure to intervene in his colleagues' misconduct. Investigators also checked to see if there were any security cameras from nearby office buildings or stores that captured the incident. While they may not have captured audio, the images of the two officers blocking Isabelle's path, confronting her, and making inappropriate gestures toward her were important additional evidence. Within a day or two, the rapid investigation had reached its preliminary conclusions. The evidence against Kowalski and O'Connell was overwhelming and undeniable. They had seriously violated a series of police regulations and ethical standards: abuse of power, blocking citizens without justifiable reason, illegally requesting identification documents, harassment and insulting behavior toward citizens using derogatory, mocking, racist and sexist language, and unprofessional conduct, seriously damaging the image and reputation of the Sacramento Police Department. The investigation report and recommended disciplinary action were presented to Chief Evans. Faced with the inescapable facts and pressure to make a decision that would be weighty enough to diffuse the situation, protect the reputation of the department, and demonstrate integrity, Chief Evans had no choice. He knew that if he simply imposed a mild form of discipline, such as a suspension or reprimand, the matter would likely leak out and cause a media storm and outrage from the governor's office. He had to act decisively. Chief Evans signed a resolution to permanently terminate both Officer Frank Kowalski and Officer Tim O'Connell from the Sacramento Police Department, effective immediately. This decision meant that their police careers would be terminated and they would lose their pensions, insurance, and all related benefits. The decision cited extremely serious misconduct, flagrant violations of the Code of Conduct and Ethics, loss of public trust, and irreparable damage to the reputation of the force. The decision to permanently terminate was the highest administrative penalty the chief of police could impose. And it was done quickly and decisively as a strong message that the Sacramento Police Department would not tolerate any abuse of power or discrimination, especially when it was directed at people of high status in society. Justice, in that way, had been served. The decision to permanently fire the two police officers went some way toward assuaging Isabelle Maro's anger. While the experience of being harassed and humiliated on the street left her feeling uneasy and insecure, the fact that those responsible for the wrongdoing were held accountable restored her faith that the system could correct itself, at least with enough intervention. The incident did not make Isabelle cower or retreat. On the contrary, it strengthened her resolve to use her voice and status to fight for social justice. She understood that if the state's first lady could be a victim of racism and police abuse, ordinary people, especially those from marginalized communities, were likely to face far worse situations with no recourse.
She would likely privately share her story with her husband, Governor Maro, and push him to enact stronger police reforms focused on combating discrimination, increasing oversight, and building community trust. For Frank Kowalski and Tim O'Connell,
the consequences of a boring afternoon and a foolish act of prejudice were devastating. They lost their stable jobs, their main source of income, their reputations, and their futures in law enforcement. This stigma would follow them for the rest of their lives, making it difficult for them to find decent work elsewhere. They faced social stigma, ostracism from their former colleagues, and possibly the breakup of their families. It was a costly lesson, a huge price to pay for their arrogance, prejudice, and thoughtless behavior. The story is a bitter reminder of the fact that racism, sexism, and abuse of power are still pervasive issues, even within the forces that are supposed to protect justice. It exposes the incalculable dangers of judging and treating others based on their appearance, skin color, or gender, ignoring their basic human dignity and rights. Justice was served swiftly and decisively. The two offenders were removed from the service. But the story inevitably raises a larger question, one about the true fairness of the system. Would an ordinary black woman, not the governor's wife, in a similar situation, receive the same swift intervention and harsh results? Or would her complaint have been ignored, downplayed, or even retaliated against? That question is not intended to undermine the justification of the treatment of Kowalski and O'Connell, but rather to highlight the need to build a system of justice and accountability that is truly equal for all, regardless of status, power, or relationship. Every citizen deserves respect and protection, and any wrongdoing by those in public office must be dealt with fairly and severely, regardless of who the victim is. Ultimately, this story is a stark warning to all those in positions of power, big or small. Never look down on others. Never let prejudice cloud your judgment and conscience, because you never know who you are dealing with. And one wrong move, even out of boredom or momentary complacency, can have dire consequences, ruining your life and career. Capitol Street that day witnessed not only the abuse of power, but also the swift downfall of those who forgot the most. Basic lesson of respect for human beings. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you like this content, please click like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next meaningful stories, because tomorrow we will have another meaningful story for you.